Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban by J.K. Rowling, Chapter 16, Professor Trelawney's Prediction. Harry's euphoria at finally winning the Quidditch Cup lasted at least a week. Even the weather seemed to be celebrating. As June approached, the days became cloudless and sultry, and all anybody felt like doing was strolling into the grounds and flopping down on the grass with several pins of iced pumpkin juice, perhaps playing a casual game of gobstones, or watching the giant squid propel itself dreamily across the surface of the lake. But they couldn't. The exams were nearly upon them, and instead of lazing around outside, the students were forced to remain inside the castle, trying to bully their brains into concentrating while enticing wafts of summer air drifted in through the windows. Even Fred and George Weasley had been spotted working. They were about to take their OWLs, ordinary wizarding novels. Percy was getting ready to sit with Newt as nastily exhausting wizard tests, the highest qualification Hogwarts offered. As Percy hoped to enter the Ministry of Magic, he needed top grades. He was becoming increasingly edgy and gave every severe punishments to anybody who disturbed the quiet of common room in the evenings. In fact, the only person who seemed more anxious than Percy was Hermione. Harry and Ron had given up asking her how she was managing to attend several classes at once, but they couldn't restrain themselves when they saw the exam timetable she had drawn up for herself. The first column read, Monday, 9 o'clock Aethermancy, 9 o'clock Transfiguration, lunch, 1 o'clock Charms, 1 o'clock Ancient Runes. Hermione, Ron said cautiously, because she was liable to explode when interrupted these days. Are you sure you're copied down this time, right? What? Snapped Hermione, picking up the exam timetable and examining it. Yes, of course I have. Is there any point asking how you're going to sit 2 exams at once? Said Harry. No, said Hermione shortly. Has either of you seen my copy of Numerology and Grammatica? Oh, yeah, I borrowed it for a bit of bedtime reading, said Ron, but very quietly. Hermione started shifting heaps of parchment around her on her table, looking for the book. Just then there was a rustle at the window, and Hedwig fluttered through it, a note clutched tightly in her beak. It's from Hagrid, said Harry, ripping the note open. Buckbeak's appeal. It's set for the 6th. This is the day we finish our exams, said Hermione, still looking everywhere for a Aethermancy book. And they're coming up here to do it, said Harry, still reading from the letter. Someone from the Ministry of Magic and an executioner. Hermione looked up, startled. They're bringing the executioner to the appeal, but that sounds as though they've already decided. Yes, it does, said Harry slowly. They can't, Ron howled. I've spent ages reading up stuff for him. They can't just ignore it all. But Harry had a horrible feeling that the comedy for the disposal of dangerous creatures had in mind made up for the by Mr. Malfoy. Draco, who had been noticeably subdued since Gryffindor's triumph in the Quidditch final, seemed to regain some of his old swagger over the next few days. From sneering comments Harry overheard, Malfoy was certain Buckbeak was going to be killed, and seemed thoroughly pleased with himself for breaking it up about. It was all Harry could do to stop himself, imitating Hermione and hitting Malfoy in the face on these occasions. And the worst thing of all was that they had no time or opportunity to go and see Hagrid, because of the strict new security measures had not been lifted, and Harry didn't dare retrieve his invisibility cloak from below the one-eyed witch.
Куда пішла?
А куда?
Так вже.
Exam week began, and an unnatural hush fell over the castle. The third years emerged from Transfiguration at lunchtime on Monday, limp and ashen-faced, comparing results and bemoaning the difficulty of the task they had been set, which had included turning a teapot into a tortoise. Hermione irritated the rest by fussing about how her tortoise had looked more like a turtle, which was the least of everyone else's worries. Mine still had a spout for a tail. What a nightmare! Were the tortoises supposed to breathe steam? It still had a willow-patterned shell. Do you think that it'll count against me? Then, after a hasty lunch, it was straight back upstairs for the charms exam. Hermione had been right. Professor Flitwick did indeed test them on cheering charms. Harry slightly overdid his out of nerves, and Ron, who was partnering with him, ended up his fist of hysterical laughter and had to be led away for a quiet room for an hour before he was ready to perform the charm himself. After dinner, the students hurried back to their common room, not to relax, but to start revising for the care of magical creatures, potions, and astronomy. Hagrid presided over the care of magical creatures exams the following morning with a very preoccupied art indeed. His heart didn't seem to be in it at all. He had provided a large tub of flashed flubberworms for the class and told them that, to pass the test, their flubberworm had to still be alive at the end of an hour. As flubberworms flourish best if left to their own devices, it was the easiest exam any of them had ever sat, and also gave Harry, Ron, and Hermione plenty of opportunity to speak to Hagrid. Beak is getting a bit depressed, Hagrid told them, bending low on the pretense of checking that Harry's flubberworm was still alive. Been cooped up for too long, but still, we'll know any day after tomorrow, one way or another. They had potions that afternoon, which was an unqualified disaster. Try as Harry might, he couldn't get his confusing concoction to thicken, and Snape, standing watching with an air of vindictive pleasure, scribbled something that looked suspiciously like a 0 onto his notes before moving away. Then came astronomy at midnight, up in the tallest tower, history of magic on Wednesday morning, in which Harry scribbled everything Florine Fortescue had ever told him about medieval witch hunts, while wishing he could have had one of Fortescue's choconut sundaes with him in the stifling classroom. Wednesday afternoon meant herbology in the greenhouses after a baking hot sun, and back to the common room once more with the backs of their necks sunburned, thinking longingly of this time next day. Then it would all be over. Their second from last exam, on Thursday from morning, was defense against the dark arts. Professor Lupin had compiled the most unusual exam of any of them ever taken, a sort of obstacle course outside in the sun, where they had to wade across a deep paddling pool containing a grindylow, cross a series of porticos through red caps, squish their ways across a patch of marsh, ignoring their misleading directions from a hinky-punk, then climb into an old trunk and battle with a new boggart. Excellent, Harry, Lupin murmured as Harry climbed out of the trunk, grinning. Full marks. Flushed with his success, Harry hung an arm to watch Ron and Hermione. Ron did very well until he reached the hunky-punk, which successfully confused him into sinking waist-high into the quagmire. Hermione did everything perfectly until she reached the trunk with her boggart in it. After about a minute inside, she burst out again, screaming. Hermione, said Lupin, started. What's the matter? Professor McGonagall, Hermione gasped, pointing into the trunk. She said I filled everything. It took a little while to calm Hermione down. When, at last, she had regained a grip on herself, she, Harry, and Ron went back to the castle. Ron was still slightly inclined to laugh at Hermione's boggart, but an argument was averted by the sight that met him on top of the steps. Cornelius Fudge, sweating slightly in his pinstriped cloak, was standing there staring at the grounds. He started at the sound of Harry. Oh, hello there, Harry, he said. Just had an exam, I expect. Nearly finished? Yes, said Harry. Hermione and Ron, not being on speaking terms with the Minister of Magic, hovered awkwardly in the background. Lovely day, said Fudge, casting an eye over the lake. Pity, pity. He sighed deeply and looked down at Harry. I am still here on a pleasant mission, Harry. The Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures required a witness to the execution of a mad hippogriff. As I needed to visit Hogwarts to check on the black situation, I was asked to step in. Does that mean the appeal has already happened? Ron interrupted, stepping forwards. No, it's scheduled for this afternoon, said Fudge, looking curiously at Ron. Then you might not have to witness an execution at all, said Ron stoutly. The hippogriff might get off. Before Fudge could answer, 2 wizards came through the castle doors behind him. One was so ancient he appeared to be withering before their very eyes. The other was tall and strapping, with a thick black mustache. Harry gathered that they have representatives of the Committee for the Disposal of Dangerous Creatures, because the very old wizard squinted towards Hagrid's cabin and said in a feeble voice, Dear, I'm getting too old for this. 2 o'clock, isn't it, Fudge? The black-moustached man was fingering something at his belt. Harry looked and saw that he was running one broad thumb across the blade of a shining axe. Ron opened his mouth to say something, but Hermione nudged him hard in the ribs and jerked her head towards the entrance hall. Why'd you stop me? Said Ron angrily as they entered the great hall for lunch. Did you see them? They've even got an axe ready. This isn't justice. Ron, your dad works for the ministry. You can't go saying things like that to his boss, said Hermione, but she too looked very upset. As long as Hagrid keeps his head there this time and argues his case properly, they can't possibly execute Buckbeak. But Harry could tell Hermione didn't really believe what she was saying. All around them, people were talking excitedly as they ate their lunch, happily anticipating the end of exams that afternoon. But Harry, Ron, and Hermione, lost in worry about Hagrid and Buckbeak, didn't join in. Harry and Ron's last exam was divination. Hermione's Muggle studies. They walked up the marble staircase together. Hermione left them on the first floor, and Harry and Ron proceeded all the way up to the 7th, where many of their class were sitting on the spiral staircase to Professor Trelawney's classroom, trying to cram in a bit of last-minute revision. "She's seeing us all separately," Neville informed them as they ran to sit down next to him. He had his copy of A Fog in the Future opened in his lap, and the pages devoted to crystal gazing. "Have either of you ever seen anything in a crystal ball?" he asked them unhappily. "Nope," said Ron in an offhand voice. He kept checking his watch. Harry knew what he was counting down the time until Buckbeak's appeal started. The queue of people outside the classroom shortened very slowly. As each person climbed back down the silver ladder, the rest of the class hissed. What did she ask? Was it okay? But they all refused to say. "She says the crystal ball told her that if I tell you, I'll have a horrible accident," squeaked Neville as he clambered back down the ladder towards Harry and Ron, who had now reached the landing. "That's convenient," snorted Ron. "You know, I started to think Hermione was right about her." He jabbed his thumb towards the trapdoor overheard. "She's a right old fraud." "Yeah," said Harry, looking at his own watch. It was now 2 o'clock. "Wish she'd hurry up." Parvati came back down the ladder, glowing with pride. "She says I've got all the markings of the true seer," she informed Harry and Ron. "I saw loads of stuff." "Well, good luck." She hurried off down the spiral staircase towards Lavender. "Ronald Weasley," said the familiar misty voice from over their heads. Ron grimaced as Harry and climbed the silver ladder out of sight. Harry was now the only person left to be tested. He settled himself on the floor with his back against the wall, listening to a fly buzzing in the sunny window, his mind across the grounds with Hagrid. Finally, after about 20 minutes, Ron's slouched feet reappeared on the ladder. "How did it go?" Harry asked him, standing up. "Rubbish," said Ron. "Couldn't see a thing. So I made some stuff up. I don't think she was convinced, though." "Meet you in the common room," Harry murmured, as Professor Trelawney's voice called. "Harry Potter." The tower room was hotter than even before. The curtains were closed, the fire was all right, and the usual sickly scent made Harry cough as he stumbled through the clutter of chairs and tables to where Professor Trelawney sat waiting for him before a large crystal ball. "Good day, my dear," she said softly. "If you would kindly gaze into the orb, take your time now, and tell me what you see within it." Harry bent over the crystal ball and stared as hard as he could, willing it to show him something other than swirling white fog, but nothing happened. "Well," Professor Trelawney prompted delicately, "what do you see?" The heat was overpowering, and his nostrils were stinging with the perfumed smoke waiting from the fire beside them. He thought of what Ron had just said, and decided to pretend. Said Harry, "a dark shape. What does it resemble?" whispered Professor Trelawney. "Think. Now." Harry cast his mind around, and it landed on Buckbeak. "A hippogriff," he said firmly. "Indeed," whispered Professor Trelawney, scribbling keenly on the parchment perched upon her knees. "My boy, you may well be seeing the outcome of poor Hagrid's trouble with the Ministry of Magic. Look closer. Does the hippogriff appear to have his head?" "Yes," said Harry firmly. "Are you sure?" Professor Trelawney urged him. "Are you quite sure, dear? You don't see it writhing on the grounds, perhaps, and shadowy figure raising an axe behind it?" "No," said Harry, starting to feel slightly sick. "No blood? No weeping Hagrid?" "No," said Harry again, wanting more than ever to leave the room in the heat. "It looks fine. It's flying away." Professor Trelawney sighed. "Well, dear, I think we'll leave it there. A little disappointing, but I'm sure you did your best." Relieved, Harry got up, picked up his bag, and turned to go, but a loud, harsh voice speaking behind him. "It will happen tonight." Harry wheeled around. Professor Trelawney had gone rigid in her armchair. Her eyes were unfocused and her mouth sagging. "Sorry." But Professor Trelawney didn't seem to hear him. Her eyes started to roll. Harry stood there in a panic. She looked as though she was about to have some sort of seizure. He hesitated, thinking of running to the hospital wing, and then Professor Trelawney spoke again in the same harsh voice, quite unlike her own. "The Dark Lord lies alone and friendless, abandoned with his followers. His servant has been chained these 12 years. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will break free and set out to rejoin his master. The Dark Lord will rise again with his servant's aid, greater and more terrible than ever before. Tonight, before midnight, the servant will set out to rejoin his master." Professor Trelawney's head fell forwards onto her chest. She made a grunting sort of noise. Then, quite suddenly, her head snapped up again. I'm so sorry, dear boy, she said dreamily. The heat of the day, you know. I drifted off for a moment. Harry stood there, still staring. Is there anything wrong, my dear? You've just told me that the Dark Lord's going to rise again, that his servant's going to go back to him. Professor Trelawney looked thoroughly startled. The Dark Lord? He who must not be named? My dear boy, that's hardly something to joke about. Rise again, indeed. But you just said it! You said the Dark Lord? I think you must have dozed off too, dear, said Professor Trelawney. I would certainly not presume to predict anything quite as far-fetched as that.